Hi everyone, and welcome to this week's edition of Straight Talk with Bren O'Brien and Tim Rowe from The Straight. Proudly brought to you by our sponsors, Inglis and Darley. Today we talk the world economy and its possible impacts on the thoroughbred industry. We chat to Alastair Pulford about the decision to bring Too Darn Hot back to Australia. And in racing, it's at a turning point for Ciaron Maher Racing. Tim and I argue over who is the most valuable 3-year-old filly. While in wagering the top 10 most wagered races, we've got all the data there and the impact on the wagering dollar on clubs. Tim, we've spent plenty of time together over the last week or so at the Easter Yearling Sale. And yeah, we won't dig too deep back into there because we did 2 podcasts around it anyway. But it was a week where we were reminded, though, that when it comes to the bloodstock world and the bloodstock industry, it's not necessarily a true reflection of the world around it. What is fascinating to me is the conversation we were having on the sidelines of Easter with key people. And you had a conversation, and I think in your column on Monday, Rowe on Monday column, you sort of discussed with David Redbers a few things. But I mean, what's your view about how the bloodstock and breeding industry views this uncertainty around the sort of global trade situation?
First of all, it's changing all the time, isn't it? I think getting up this morning, I've read and watched the news a little bit, and Trump's increasing tariffs on China, and maybe it's not coming into force in other regions. I don't want to pretend to be an expert, but it is changing all the time, so it's hard to get a definitive answer on this. But the thoroughbred industry is increasingly global, isn't it? And horses going here, there, shuttling, horses racing in different jurisdictions, travelling, there's Hong Kong coming up, Australian horses are going there, there's Breeders' Cups later in the year. So, and just for the importance of the breeding industry, that there is that mix of bloodlines coming in and out, and as we'll hear from Alastair later, Too Darn Hot coming back, very important stallion is a shuttling stallion. And if that, comes from America, Justify and so forth in the past, if there's tariffs, it just an extra cost and an already expensive business.
Yeah, and someone like David Redbers, you spoke to the other day, like he spends a lot of his time on a plane. I think 5 out of the 6 times I've spoken to David over the last few years, he's been in an airport lounge when he's, going from America back to UK or whatever else. He's obviously, runs Twickenham Stud. He's obviously in charge of Sheikh Fahad's racing, and he's got a strong connection down here through horses like Zoo Star and horses like that as well. Qatar Racing got a strong sense as well. So, but his insights are interesting because he sees it from a global perspective. And they see the challenges are still there. I mean, the reality is, regardless of any time President Trump opens his mouth, this situation seems to change. The uncertainty is the thing that's probably going to cause the trouble, isn't it, Tim?
It's a crossover, I guess, perhaps a bit like the wagering industry and what's happening there. It is just, you can't plan with certainty, can you? Particularly breeding a horse takes years just to get it to a sale, let alone the racetrack. So you need that certainty of, if you're committing to shuttling a stallion or buying mares or sending mares to America to be bred, you want that certainty and continuation and momentum of a breed and having it in front of people. And, if they can't do that, that will cause, huge, it'll be hugely detrimental to the industry.
Yeah, and I talked to Jamie McCalmont, the global bloodstock agent, about the global uncertainty and the challenges. It was a bit early in the week, so things have changed and evolved a little bit over the last few days, but that sense of, not knowing what the bloodstock trade is going to look like on a global level will certainly be impacting thinking going forward.
I think what's a big worry in Europe now is the Americans probably 10 years ago, they probably bought under 10 yearlings a year from Europe. Last year, I'd say they bought 75 to 100.
Yeah.
That really made the middle market much stronger than it's been. And now with what Mr. Trump is doing there, that could have a massive effect. And I should think a lot of people are very worried.
Yeah, I mean, it is in many ways a local industry, but it's a global industry, isn't it? What goes on overseas and overseas markets does have a significant effect.
Well, racing has become considerably global in the last 20 years. Do you know what I mean? I mean, this sale is as global as any sale that you'll go to. I mean, just look at all the people buying. So by doing this, it's just such a step backwards. Do you know what I mean? And such a step backwards for the thoroughbred breed. I mean, if you look in America, the bloodlines in America sort of came over from Europe in the 30s and the 40s and the 50s. And then, starting with, a lot of those good horses in the 70s, like Nijinsky, Roberto, Saraiva, the Minstrel, and so on, they were all bred in America. And then it kind of flip-flopped back again. And now the Americans have come back trying to repatronize him, which is great.
Yeah.
This announcement last week is a massive step backwards, in my opinion.
Yeah, and as it does rely upon that, flying back. Go north and south. And
no one benefits from that.
Yeah.
It's a negative. It doesn't help their breed, and it's very sad, I think.
Yeah, so as Jamie points out, we're in a global marketplace, no more illustrated by the impact of shuttle stallions. This week's Darley's confirmed that Too Darn Hot is returning to Australia. We're lucky enough to be joined by Alastair Pulford, Darley's head of stallions here in Australia. Alastair, thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Bren. Delighted to be with you.
I guess during your time at Darley, you've been associated with some great stallions, Exceed Excel, Lonrose, Street Cry, even Street Boss now. It's only early days in Too Darn Hot's stud career, but where do you see him fitting in the overall picture once he's, in the years to come?
Well, the way he's started, he might be the best of the lot. We've been fortunate. We've stood 3 champion stallions. One of them, Street Cry, was a shuttle stallion, an amazing influence, and continues to be. And so, look, he probably started off the hard way. Being an American raced horse, he didn't get the support here in the early stages that a lot of horses have, but he proved just what an amazing stallion he was, and this horse Too Darn Hot, in some ways they're similar in that both Group 1 winners, by Group 1 winners, out of Group 1 winners, and you just felt a bit of confidence about Too Darn Hot from the time they indicated that he was a shuttle prospect. So he started off as I said, in amazing fashion in both hemispheres, and let's hope it continues.
What is it about Too Darn Hot's progeny? Obviously, Too Darn Hot himself's got an amazing pedigree, as possibly as good as you get. But what makes them well above average? Do you think, when you look at them physically, or other traits that they've got? What makes them so good?
Okay, so first of all, versatility. So he's getting champion 2-year-olds like broadsiding, but not just early 2-year-olds. I mean, broadsiding was the best 2-year-old in the latter half of the 2-year-old season last year. Obviously, Riverlino this year won a Golden Slipper lead up, and then was tremendous in the Golden Slipper itself, coming from way back to run 4th. So but then he's getting horses like Shanwa, who's a multiple Group 2 winner over 2,000 meters and running touched off 3rd in the AJC Derby, so ATC Derby. So versatility is a key, and to become champion sire, I think you need to be able to do that. Street Cry obviously got a Blue Diamond winner like Pride of Dubai and a Melbourne Cup winner like Shocking. So I don't think that's beyond the realms, for Too Darn Hot either. I mean, he was essentially a great sort of sprinter miler, or miler really, where he's at his peak. He just got a mile, but his family, is full of stamina. So there's the hope that he can throw that stamina, but he's also, if you talk to anyone who had any association with him during his racing career, i.e. John Gosden and Frankie Dettori, they said he was all about speed. John Gosden described him as a Ferrari. So that's the sort of horse he is. He's just got that versatility. He's a beautiful horse to look at. He's not a big, burly, strapping, sprinting type of horse. He's a very elegant horse. He's got a lovely head. He's got a wonderful way of moving, and I think that's what really gets people in when they see him. He's just, perfectly balanced, but he's just got this elegant movement about him.
Obviously, last year he unfortunately didn't come back. Sort of a little colic setback at the wrong time, and you decided to rest him with Watership Down stud, but he still covered 59 mares to Southern Hemisphere time last year. There's been, I know, Godolphin in Australia, your team, Andy Mackiff and yourself and so forth, has been pushing hard to bring him back over a lot of months, negotiating and making sure he's okay. When did you finally get the tick of approval? Yes, he's going to come back.
Only in the last few weeks. I mean, when he had the year off last year, the intention was never that it would be permanent. They did make that very clear at the time, that he had had, 4 consecutive shuttle seasons. He had that little colic scare, and that just, would have given me the jitters had I been the principal owner of him. He's an extremely valuable horse, but touch wood, that was a one-off, and he hasn't had missed a beat since. So Yeah, I mean, it was always likely, and then obviously with his growing success here, it became obvious to them that he's as important in the southern hemisphere as he is in the north. He does have that continuity of crops coming through, having thanks to the fact that he was made available to southern hemisphere breeders, and and a lot of leading breeding as well as ourselves made good use of that last year. We sent 10 mares up to be covered by him. People like John Camilleri and Rosemont Stud and others, did make use of him. So he's covered some very nice mares up there last year that'll be out here and due to foal in the coming months from August onwards. And so that's exciting, because whilst he's not the type of stallion that relies on one crop and they are durable, as we've already seen, they're running on from 2 to 3. Just missing that year does impact them in some sense, and but Street Cry missed 2 years. It didn't really affect him. Street Boss missed his second crop. I know Danehill missed a year 1 year. So they can get over it. That's for sure. It's not the biggest. If they're good enough, they'll get over it.
Broadside was his breakout star. He's quite a remarkable colt. Not many could do what he did as a 2-year-old, racing at 3 different stages, winning 2 Group 1s, then returning at 3 to do it again. Interesting racing profile. Rosehill Guineas obviously beat a horse which is currently then gone out and won the Derby by 5 lengths, so that form stood out well. Back to the all age. I mean, it's an interesting profile for a horse. I mean, I know you're not part of the racing team, but was there a sense there of where that fits? And
I think he won the Rosehill Guineas on pure class.
Yeah.
He cruised up to them at the straight and looked like he was going to run away from them. But like his father, probably 1,600 meters is going to be his best trip. That's to me where he sits. He's won his big races at that trip. 7 furlongs and a mile. That he looks like his father. He's very much in the mold of Too Darn Hot physically. He's maybe a little bit lengthier, but he's very similar. You can see a little bit of Street Cry in him, but he's got his father's quality. He is a very similar horse, and I think aptitude-wise, he's probably very similar. I think he won that Rosehill Guineas on pure class, and when you have a champion 2-year-old who's won the Golden Rose first up at 3 and then wins the Rosehill Guineas, you want to test him against the weight for age horses. That's the ultimate test of class. As a 3-year-old, we've missed the Cox Plate. He ran in the Cox Plate, ran super against Via Sistina, ran 3rd. I think he's the fastest 3-year-old ever in a Cox Plate, which is no mean feat. So now the opportunity to test him again. And having seen that 2,000 meter effort, he wasn't going to go to the Queen Elizabeth Stakes, but I think, and that's just from my point of view, but I make it very clear that I don't make any racing decisions in our organisation.
And in terms of planning for next year, are you planning to be on the roster in the spring, or are you thinking that he may race on at 4?
Look, it's still to be decided, but I suppose it very much depends on the result next week, on 10 days' time.
The Alastair, as we touched on, Exceed and Excel and Lonhro no longer on the roster, but the regeneration of the Darley roster seems to be going well, obviously with Too Darn Hot, but there's Harry Angel, another shuttler, and even Bivouac started really well, and I think he's an interesting one. Correct me if you don't agree with me, but I think it's fair to say last year his first crop yearlings weren't for everyone, but more importantly, they seem to be doing it on the track, and that's what changes perception and what people buy up eventually once they've got something to go off. Is that a fair assessment?
I think ultimately we're not trying to breed winners in the Sydney Royal Show. We're trying to breed winners at Royal Randwick, and Bivouac's proving you can do that. And he seems to be imparting that brilliant speed that he had. He was a phenomenal racehorse himself, and interesting. Breeders learn, and he's not for a sprinter. He's not a big robust horse either. He's not like his father. He's not nearly as heavy as his father was in terms of his body structure, and I think breeders learnt that and probably bred differently to him in this second season. A couple of them said to me that we actually didn't see him first year because that was the year no one could travel with COVID, and we changed the type of mare we sent to him. So his yearlings have sold and they've looked much better across the board this year. But more importantly, I suppose they seem to have ability. Biovacht is very, very highly regarded by the stable. He's obviously, he he's got to get it all together in his head. But when he does put it together, he has got a huge amount of talent. And the filly in the West, who won so convincingly the other day, looks very good. And obviously that filly in New Zealand is very good. So, and Cavalry Girl's obviously very good. So it's very encouraging that he does seem to be taking the right steps. Very encouraging.
And with Animo, obviously, understandably, putting a lot of resources and behind him. He's, I think, Sheikh Mohammed's most successful racehorse. What he did was from 2 to 4 was quite remarkable as well, a bit like broadsiding, what he's been able to do. What are his first foals like? And maybe there'll be some at the Yearling sales for a little. What can you tell us about them?
There are a few at the Yearling sales. Everyone who's got one tells me how nice it is. In our own at Woodlands, our bloodstock manager, Jason Walsh, he assures me that it is the best group of foals by any first season sire we've ever had. And that's generally the case. There's tremendous talk about them. Everyone loves them. The thought is that they're probably a bit more robust than most people expected because, he was obviously a great mile and a quarter horse. But, don't forget he was a very precocious 2-year-old. He won his first race the day before he turned 2, his actual second birthday, which was a stakes race, and then went on to run in Blue Diamonds and run third in a Blue Diamond, second in a Golden Slipper. So he was a really, really talented 2-year-old who just then, kept going and went on as a 4-year-old. But a lot of people remembered him as a 4-year-old wait for age horse, not as a 2-year-old. So they're a little bit surprised by what they're seeing, but pleasantly surprised. It's in a good way. And I think just with the quality of mare he covered, so just trying to assess the quality of the book he covered last year, we think that it was, twice as good as any first season we've ever had. There was just consistently through the book, high numbers of stakes winners, stakes producers, metropolitan class horses, metropolitan class mares. So I would think he's got a really good opportunity. We've supported him more strongly than we've supported any first season sire in the past. So we've sent 18 first year and I think 21 last year. So that's, and they're our best mares. They're most of our best mares are going to him. So like Two Don Hot, he's a Group 1 winner, by a Group 1 winner, out of a Group 1 winner. He's got that depth of pedigree behind him as well as the performance, and hopefully that can lead to superstar success,
Oh, that's terrific. Thanks for your time. I really appreciate it, and all the best for the rest of the season heading into the breeding season.
No worries. Thank you for your time. Great to chat.
And it's time now for our Darley Stat of the Week. Here's a quick look at Animo. His first 2 books will affect his champion status. In those first 2 seasons, he covered 19 Group 1 winners, 82 Group winners, 127 stakes winners, and 186 black type performers. But it doesn't stop there. He's also covered the dams of 18 Group 1 winners, 42 Group winners, and 57 stakes winners. And to top it off, Godolphin has sent him 40 of their best mares. Safe to say, Animo is an easy choice this season. Tim, you had a chat with Ciaron Maher earlier this week after the announcement his brother Declan is leaving the stable to set up his own operation in Queensland. That comes after the departures of CEO Ben Salinger and a sort of host of other changes over the last couple of months. Plenty of rumours flying around. It's the racing industry. This is what we live off, is rumours, but, there's plenty of stuff flying around at the moment. Are we seeing an inflection point in the rise of Ciaron Maher Racing, do you think?
People love, what's going on at big organisations, don't they? Whether it's Stud Farms, Godolphin, or, Yulong and whatever, Coolmore, what they're all doing. And Kieran's one of them. He's built from the ground up. And I guess, as we've said in the past, he has had important people leave in the past, like Annabelle Neesham and David Eustace, of course, and Lucy Yeomans in the training side go and do their own things. And he's built his business on that by encouraging ambitious young people to work for him. So I guess maybe at this point where they just had a bit of a, not a reset, but there's a couple of people leaving and he's just had to find the next group, and I'm sure he will. I don't think, certainly his on-track performance hasn't been impacted yet, and I dare say Kieran's demeanour probably leads to this where he stays quite relaxed, and that helps him. He certainly outwardly doesn't seem to stress too much, and as long as the results keep coming, which I'm sure they will, business as usual.
Yeah, and we spoke a few weeks ago about Ben Salinger leaving the CEO, the corporate model, and whether that was probably not necessarily suited to the way Ciaron wanted to run things too. There's obviously this discussion around Leilani Stables and who gets Leilani Stables and Ciaron's desire there. What happens with that? So it's an interesting point. I think that we're going through a point of change in the trading industry. Anyway, I think the costs of the last 2 years and the business models have become tighter, even for the big stables. And there's a lot of discussion around people coming in and out of the big stables, as well as new trainers and other opportunities. And it's just the way that the industry works, isn't it? There's always flux and change and things working their way through. And I think in the case of Ciaron, it is the case that he's probably going through a bit of a period of change at the moment, but with a view that, as you said, if you look over the 10 or 20 years of his career now, there's been plenty of times when there's been change and he seems to have come out bigger and better from it. All right, let's talk on the track. And you and I were both at Randwick on Saturday as Aliana destroyed the boys in the ATC Derby. On Saturday, Trace of the Moment will look to stretch a winning streak in the Oaks, and there's a long odds-on favourite to do so. We also have the sprinter milers like Lady Shenandoah and Autumn Glow who have dominated. Between them, these 4 fillies have won 21 of their 31 races to date. I can't remember a better band of 3-year-old fillies coming through, and they are lengths and lengths and lengths, as we saw in the Derby on Saturday, better than the Colts. I'm going to put a question on you, Tim. If you had to buy one to race on with, just to race on with, which one would you buy?
For me, I don't think there's one that's straight to the top for me, Autumn Glow. I don't think, yes, she had that, whether she would have, she was favourite to beat Lady Shenandoah in the flight stakes, and then she had the little issue with bone chips and things like that. I don't think they've got to the bottom of her, and it'll be interesting to see how she goes on Saturday in the Arrowfield over 1200. I think she's a Cox Plate mare all day long. So a bit like the Autumn Sun, probably didn't get to, he was probably a Derby horse or Caulfield Cup horse, and so I think once probably his next season, get it to 1,600, 2,000 metres, Cox Plate probably. Yeah, I think we'll see the best of her, and that's the mare I'd love to have.
All right, ownership-wise, I would probably go with Lady Shenandoah. She's a favourite of mine, and I think she's got that upside. I think there's very few between her and Autumn Glow. I think the other two are staying fillies, so their program's probably a little bit limited. They may, hopefully turn up in Cox Plates or whatever. The presence of the Golden Eagle makes it fascinating. It makes it possible that all 4 could be targeted that race. I don't think it'll happen, but wouldn't it be great to see those horses go there, given the strength of what they're doing? Last question on that one. From a breeding point of view, which one would you want? I'm tipping the answer might be the same, but I'll leave it to you.
Yes, I think so. Yeah, she's a $1.8 million yearling. She's a 3/4 to win the Congo, who's obviously Newgate Farm stud Golden Rose winner. Yeah, no genius there, but I think that's who I'd also take home. So if John Massara and Hermitage want to do a deal, let's give got my number.
I don't think John Massara is giving up Autumn Glow readily. He's she's well named because the glow in John Massara's voice when he talks about this filly, for a man that's seen almost everything he can possibly can in the breeding caper and racing caper, he clearly is in love with this filly and thinks she's absolutely awesome. The English Chairman's Sale is just 4 weeks away, and the catalogue is now available online. A total of 87 lots have been catalogued for the sale, including 64 stakes horses or stakes producers, 18 pregnant mares, or they're on their first or second cover, 76 fillies and mares aged 10 or younger, and 26 mares that are free of Danehill blood. An extraordinary group of high-class fillies and mares, including 4-time Group 1 winner and Everest victor Darley the beautifully bred Group 2 winning and Group 1 placed 2 Darn Lizzie, the record-breaking mare I Am Me, and Group 1 winners Royal Merchant and Coco Sun, joined a catalogue as well as many, many others. There are also the dams of top-class horses like Caulfield Guineas winners Golden Mile and Griff, Goodwood's winner Benedetta, and Star filly 2 Darn Lizzie's Dam, as well as the dam of exciting Group 1 2-year-old field of play. The Chairman's Sale will be held at the Riverside Stables on the evening of Thursday, May 8th from 5 p.m. Go to english.com.au to check out the catalogue. Finally, Tim, in the wagering landscape, we published a story of the most wagered on race in Australia this week. No great surprises at the top with the Melbourne Cup dominant, but if you have a look at that list, what stood out to you out of that list? I've been talking about this list for about 4 weeks now, so I'll let you have your thoughts on it.
Interesting thing to me was that the last race on Melbourne Cup Day was, in the top 10, which has got, I guess it shows the level of engagement from punters, and people wanting to either play up their winnings or try and get out on the last race. If you talk to WSPs, they say, Willie Pike in the last in Perth is always hugely bet race, and the last race in Adelaide always generally attracts good turnover, and that's because people, you're there, they want to either try and get out, and I'm not condoning irresponsible gambling, but also if you've got money in your pocket, you want to try and double it, and before you go out and celebrate, I guess go for a nice dinner.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I think 8 of the top 10 races were in that 3-week bracket in spring. That sort of speaks to that concept which I think we've spoken about before, about the spring being the absolutely key time, and the position of the Everest has sort of increased that. And the King Charles Stakes as well being put on that day has also created plenty of interest as well. I wanted to touch on the Everest, Tim, because it's something I've got to touch on in a newsletter I'm writing today. The Everest is fourth. It'll soon be third from all reports from what we're hearing, that it's closing the gap on the Caulfield Cup and probably moving to third place. I want to raise something with you, which I think is really interesting. The impact of Carrying Rising on the Everest from a wagering revenue point of view. Now, this will be huge if it's part of the Whirlpool, which we assume it will be. If it's part of the Whirlpool, it'll obviously attract enormous amount of interest from Hong Kong, because this horse is an absolute superstar of Hong Kong racing. More so than what Romantic Warrior was when he won the Cox Plate, because if you think about that, Romantic Warrior is probably still on his way up at that stage and became more and more of a sort of a Hong Kong sweetheart in the months and years following, where Carrying Rising is absolutely in the ascendancy at the moment. Now, I don't have official figures on this, but my estimation is that the presence of Carrying Rising in the Everest could mean $1 million of Whirlpool funding for the ATC. That's a lot of money for the ATC, which, as we know at the moment, have got a few challenges with their bottom line and getting things work out. And wagering revenue has been particularly identified as that. Does that change the slot negotiation process? Do you think that this horse kind of has to be at the Everest, regardless of whatever else goes on? He means more in terms of revenue for the Everest than any other horse in the race.
Just first of all, he's just watching the trends of Whirlpool. He's going to start very, very shorter than what the fixed odds would be. If he gets here and lands okay and makes the field, I'm sure he could take fixed odds and then lay off on the toe backing out the runners, just because he is going to start so short, even with the additional takeout. But you're right. I think now the Stars relinquished their slot. I'm not sure what Inglis are doing this year. They've sold theirs or leased theirs out in the past. The ATC, I think the ATC, so one of those sellers will be desperate to get Carrying Rising, and ATC could make sense where they're going to get it back through revenue, as you say, up possibly $1 million. So the Hong Kong Jockey Club are very good at, understandably, they can negotiate very well because they've got a lot of pull and generate a lot of income.
Leverage, I think, is the word you're looking for, Tim. I think leverage is the word.
Yeah, leverage. Thank you, Bren. Needed the dictionary. Yeah, they're or thesaurus. They will get a deal done, and I think Winfred, CEO, is on record as saying they might buy a slot for 3 years for Carrying Rising and become a genuine part of the Everest. There were Hong Kong Jockey Club representatives on day one of the championships at Randwick. So, they're there. So a deal will get done, I'm sure. Absolutely certain. It's just with which party. And I'm sure ATC will be there, and whether or Racing New South Wales sells the slot vacated by the Star.
Yeah, I guess my point being it's a different negotiation / calculation than what you would do for a Group 1 winning horse in Australia, who would add to the race but wouldn't add so substantially to the race as what Carrying Rising would in terms of revenue and Whirlpool, and whether that then affects things like the timing of the race, whether they decide to push it a little bit later because it works better in Hong Kong, because that could materially affect the amount of revenue and wagering that's driven from it. So there's a bit to play out there, and I think it's more than just a straight up negotiating a slot, and it's a prime example of how wagering and racing are inextricably linked. And in this situation, with the right result, the ATC could get a bit of a windfall here, which, as I said, in their current environment, they'd be very much appreciative of. Okay, thanks for joining us on Straight Talk, brought to you by Inglis and Darley. Don't forget to give us a rating wherever you're listening to us on our podcast. We're on multiple platforms: Apple, Podbean, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you choose to find us. Be sure to subscribe. Send us an email at editor@thestraight.com.au. Be happy to hear your feedback about anything you want to discuss, or any guests, or if any guests want to put their hand up and say, hey, I'd love to be on your podcast. Happy to take that on board. We'll talk to you again next week.
Bren, just before we go, I thought we should give a shout out to Brian and Julia. Brian's
yes.
owner. Yes, we left, as we said, we were at Randwick on Saturday and we left the races and bumped into lovely Brian and Julia, invited us around to their house just around the corner from Randwick. And Brian even said, "Oh, you're the guys from the podcast." There's probably another podcast out there that he's got us confused with, but we'll take the praise anyway. So thank you for the hospitality for Brian and Julia. And, straight gin's not for me, but I did give it a go. Thanks, Brian.
Yeah, no, thank you for them for their and then though Brian called me Tim for the entirety of the night, it was a very enjoyable evening. So we do appreciate their fun. Okay, as mentioned, we'll be back again next week and we'll talk to you then.